Brian, did you want to come join me for a minute?
Great. Well, before I open it up for the audience for questions, I'll ask you a couple of them. So all of us have uncomfortable conversations with people that we may have differing views with. What would be some of your recommendations to keep it so it's actually a good civil conversation in that discourse?
Well, I think if you're armed, that usually is helpful. No.
With information or other things? Sorry, I just had to ask.
No, I think the answer is be willing to listen. Just be willing to listen. Go into those conversations wanting to learn. And if you go in and you're willing to listen and you want to learn, I think it'll be a good experience. And also just that type of approach, of course, people with whom you're speaking appreciate it. And when someone sees that you're paying attention and that you're listening, I think it can't help but foster a civil conversation.
Great. So you've interviewed a lot of very interesting people over the years. What is one of your top favorite interviews that you've had? Not picking favorites, but one that just jumps to mind. You say, wow, that was a fantastic interview, and it was really informational and interesting.
Well, I'm far too modest to say that it was a wonderful interview. I mean, I love Al Simpson. I have to tell you, he has so many facts at his command. He has such an extraordinary sense of humor, and he swears a lot. So I really, Al separates himself from the crowd quite a bit. But I think I've had just such good fortune in terms of being able to talk to so many interesting people. So I'd probably rate Al up there, definitely at the top. Some interviews are a little more challenging than others with interesting people. And there's some interviews don't go as well as you'd like. Yeah. So I've had the full range of experience. But I'd probably put Al at the top of the list.
Right. The rancor and hate speech and disconnection and judgment, separation, etc., seems to be getting worse and worse. One, do you agree with that? And two, do you think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, assuming your project doesn't change all things for the positive right away?
Well, I think it is getting worse. I mean, one of the problems is it's effective. That's why that's why you see it spreading. I think for a long time what was going on in Washington did not infect Colorado. And I think really we were able to stay above the fray compared to a lot of other states for a long time. And I think unfortunately that has changed, and we're almost as bad as what goes on in Washington. In terms of how it's going to play out, I think that's a function of time. I would say my hope, we haven't started our project, but my hope is that things will get better. I would guess in the next 5 months, with the presidential election shaping up the way it has, it's not going to get better.
Let's open it up to the audience. What questions do you have? Sue? So Sue's question, though, from LPR, you didn't state your county. We were in a similar program together, and you always have to tell which county you're from, so I just love it. But anyway, Sue's question was giving the two presidential candidates and how polarizing they are on different ends of the spectrum. What are you hearing from your guest as it relates to overcoming that divide?
I don't think anybody expects this election to overcome that divide. I guess I think a lot of people who have been in the public service arena are very nervous when they talk to people. We've had a lot of ambassadors on the show, 4 secretaries of state, John Kerry, Madeleine Albright, Jim Baker, have been, and General Colin Powell have all been on the show. I think there's, I think with Donald Trump, there's a tremendous amount of nervousness and surprise at how effective he's been. And so I think a lot of the type of guests I have really didn't see what has happened. They didn't see it coming. And I think they still don't see it coming. So I think there are many more surprises in store.
Interesting. Chris, we'll go in the back and we'll come back around.
Question from a different angle. You've had many leading U.S. citizens guests on your show, as well as international folks. And I'm just curious, from the international perspective, what view they have with respect to the United States.
So for those that don't know Chris Winslow, he has lived and worked on 6 different continents. Is the number correct?
Morocco, Venezuela, Belgium, Greece, Hong Kong, China, and the UK are the ones that live. And I've been just about everywhere else.
And Colorado. I mean, come on, Chris. Come on. So his question is, a lot of his guests are obviously U.S.-based, but what is the international viewpoint as it relates to civility and the discourse and discussion in the United States?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, I think most of you know who have traveled outside of the country. Many people, a much higher percentage of people in other countries are familiar with other countries besides their own. So I think at times there's a lot of surprise at how little Americans know about the rest of the world. And it's not necessarily a benign ignorance, but it's an unintentional ignorance. I think most people still look at the United States as an extraordinary country and look at our country in a very positive way. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't because of some of the actions we've taken, obviously. But I think overall, globally, the U.S. is still, I believe, the place to be.
Let's wrap around. Yes.
Just wanted to know your thoughts on the changes in campaign finance. Corporations or people do have things, the super PACs, and how you can take money from the budget in areas. How do you see that as a positive, negative, influencing, changing? And obviously with 2 candidates on the both left and right that were very adamant about not taking money from those types of environments, Donald and Bernie. What do you think about campaign finance and the changes in that environment?
So the question is, what are your thoughts on campaign finance and specifically the super PACs and any different changes and the positives and negatives with that?
I think in the past you had a lot of business money coming into campaigns because, as I mentioned, businesses have a vested interest in terms of overall policy, general tax policy, sometimes specific. Businesses who want to take advantage of or get some type of special consideration. And so, for example, I've been a huge proponent for years of a flat tax for both businesses and individuals, because if you remove all the complicated opportunities to get special treatment, I think a lot of businesses will drop back out of the political arena. What you've had that's different really in the past decade, though, is this rise of very wealthy people, billionaires or whatever, who are in the political, who've gotten involved in the political game, partially because of self-interest, business-wise, but also philosophically. And so the solution that I just proposed, that partial solution, really is only a partial solution. I think you see in terms of, you're talking about, you're indirectly referencing Citizens United. I happen to think that the people who should be able to donate and participate in campaigns should be limited to the electorate. I don't believe corporations are people. Corporations are corporations, and they have certainly special benefits, and I'm all for those benefits, but I don't think they should be playing in the political world. At this point, though, it kind of doesn't matter. And so, because what I tell people is, if you have an interest, if you have a business interest in who gets elected, in legislation that gets passed, you're going to find a way to influence that. And you can do it through 501c4s, you can do it through 501c3s. And so money goes where it's going to make a difference. And so to me, you have to step back and not blame business people or businesses. I think you have to step back and say, how do we reduce the role government plays in the business world? And if we can do that and still protect the public interest, then I think you're going to see a dramatic decrease on the part of businesses to participate in politics.
Answer. Yes.
All right, so, and personally, I'm divided from the standpoint, you talked about a flat tax, right? So when Ted Cruz talked about everybody, companies included, filing your taxes on a postcard, what would that be? You talk about special interest money not wanting that to happen, right? Because what happens to all the lawyers, accountants, anybody to do with real estate because of a home loan interest deduction? So just some comments on that. That's an idea that at a high level sounds like a good idea, but would have a major, major impact on a lot of folks in this room and around the country.
So the question is, what are your thoughts? Flesh it out a little more with regards to a flat tax. And if you don't mind, I'd like to add to that the difference between a flat tax and a fair tax as well, because they kind of in conjunction with each other.
Okay, yeah. If you're a CPA, you're screwed under my plan. That's no. I think the answer is twofold. One is certainly you can phase those kind of changes in over time. Number one, so you minimize the pain, but there certainly will be some dislocation. But if you're doing something that's not good in the first place, to me, that's not a good argument for continuing it. And so, for example, if we reduce by going to a flat tax the number of attorneys that there are in the United States, if we reduce the number of CPAs that there are in the United States, if we essentially allow businesses to dedicate their resources to being more productive and more efficient and not spend so much money on complying with tax codes or figuring out how to maximize those advantages, I think in the long run that's a good thing for business to be able to, if I'm a business person and I operate a business or a few, I would love to spend more time on being productive and not so much time on tax or legal issues. So I think in the long run, it's a plus for business. I think it's a plus for the economy. If you're a tax lawyer, not so good. But we'll take 5 or 10 years and give you some retraining if need be.
There's a great book called Fair Tax by Neil Bortz I'd recommend to you, and he talks about the retooling of all of those individuals, that they'd actually start doing things that are more positive and proactive versus things that are always reactive as it relates to the tax code. And it could be revolutionary for our country. It could be fascinating. Yes?
Thank you for your experience and wisdom and sharing that with us. It appears to me that the two-party or the dominance of a two-party system is part of the polarizing force. Could you maybe talk about a third three-party balance and the likelihood of that happening in any of our lifetimes?
The question is that the two-party system seems to be adding to that polarizing force that's out there, and would a third party help to balance it? And is it possible to even see it come to fruition?
The answer is, we have third and fourth and fifth and sixth parties. They just, as a rule, haven't got much traction. When Ralph Nader was on the show and I blamed him for Al Gore's loss, he got mad at me and said that he made Gore a better candidate. Spoken like a true lawyer, I might say, which Ralph is. But you look at Ross Perot's run, I think it's instructive. When Perot ran, when he originally ran, he at one point was actually leading in the polls. And you may recall, for those of you of a certain age, that he dropped out because of some alleged conspiracy that the FBI was going to interfere with his daughter's wedding or something like that. He came back into the race and still, he still got a very impressive number of votes. If you look at the polling recently for this race, Gary Johnson How many of you know who Gary Johnson is? Raise a hand. Oh, okay. So we have a few libertarians here. The Libertarian Party candidate was polling at 10%, which is pretty amazing since probably only 1% of the population knows who he is. So I think there's potential for that, but the reality is if you look how things are structured, if you look at how the media dedicates its space in time, this two-party system is really tough to break. If Bloomberg had run, he might have had a shot. When Trump ran, I thought when he announced he wasn't going to spend any money, which he changed, I thought that was the death knell for him. But I thought that if he were willing to spend millions of dollars, that he had a shot at getting the nomination, and obviously he did. And he actually hasn't spent that much. He has spent less than Hillary Clinton and less than Bernie Sanders to get the Republican nomination. So I think it's possible. I think it's difficult. But this election will probably get more Americans thinking about a third-party candidate, not necessarily voting for one, but thinking about it than previous ones. But you have a lot at stake at this election, and I think you'll see Democrats will be energized, not necessarily by Hillary Clinton, but by the fact that Donald Trump is the nominee of the other party. I think Republicans are going to be energized equally, not because they're necessarily that excited about Donald Trump, but because Hillary Clinton is the nominee of the other party.
Just to add to that, it's interesting in Colorado, just as kind of a microcosm, and you look at the stats over the years, and dominated by Democrats and Republicans, and you fast forward to today, and now it's a third, a third, a third. And that other third that's come on the line is the independent voter, and they're just tired of going back and forth. And so each party is vying for that third. So it'd be interesting to see if, in fact, a third party can be created, and then they're competing against the others. It'd be very fascinating. So, next question. Yes.
You're very fascinating, and I think the opportunity to bring you here. There's a lot of questions I'd love to ask, but if you could find two things. One has to do with the soon-to-be $20, $22 trillion debt that we have, and the other is the world reserve currency, and kind of your thoughts about those two things and how they could collide and what the impact might be.
So the question is, with regards to our country's debt and how it's gotten completely out of control, and also the world reserve currency. Correct.
So on the world, of course, I mean, everyone has been, not everyone, many people have been predicting the death of the dollar for years. I think in China's ascension, I think the slowdown in China has reduced a lot of that talk as well. I think the focus right now, of course, is on the future of the euro. I think you see a lot of investments going into the dollar because of the uncertainty of the euro. I think you have a number of European nations quietly realizing that their inability to float currency was a huge mistake. So you'll see quickly in a matter of days if Brexit occurs or not with Great Britain. I'll go out on a limb. I originally predicted that it would pass. I think that the threat of job loss, of issues related to manufacturing, might tip the scales in favor of staying in. But I'm going to gamble. I'm going to say it passes, and that will, of course, mean all of you will be investing in gold stocks very soon. In terms of the debt, to me, the debt is extraordinary. It's ridiculous. It's something that we should address. I don't think it'd be that difficult to address. It means making some sacrifices. I think people are unwilling to make those shared sacrifices today because they feel, the public feels, the fix is in. I think if we had a program that was honestly able to have everyone share in those sacrifices, I think the American people would rise to that occasion. But I think most people feel the fix is in Washington and that they are going to bear a disproportionate burden of that fix. And so the result is no one wants to make any sacrifices. The gentleman mentioned about the mortgage deduction on your home. I mean, there are so many elements of what, of what we each get in terms of special tax treatment, tax credits, et cetera, benefits from the government. We have government spending that, in my opinion, is just absolutely out of control with no real governor on it. But unless you have the commitment of the people, I think you're not going to solve that problem. And if you look at who's going to suffer the most, it's really the younger generation. And those of us over 50, which I might be, I'm not going to admit. On TV, you never admit your age. We're happy because all the candidates are promising our benefits are going to be untouched. I'm for means testing for benefits. I believe we should help people who need help. But if you're making 250 grand a year or $1 million a year, or if you have 20 million in assets, you don't need to be on Medicare. I'm for giving you the Social Security that you put into the system, maybe with a little interest on top. But again, if you're wealthy, you do not need to be draining the Treasury like that. But we all have this entitlement sense in this country, many of us, and we want what's ours, and the rest of the country be damned.
Another question. Got one over here.
My question relates to censorship. I've spent time with radical right, radical left, but I've spent time with anarchists and law and order types. And recently, the trend seems to be even acknowledging that a polar opposing opinion it can't possibly be valid. And so the trend now, with these devices everywhere, we can carry around these echo chambers that constantly reaffirm our worldview and never challenge it. And so when you actually encounter someone with a polar opposite view, it's difficult to have a civil discourse. How would you see a trend happening towards, being able to actually have that discourse when most of the forces in society seem to want to pull us apart?
So the question is, with regards to censorship, with everything that's going on right now, is seeming to quell more and more different ideas. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, of course, one of the changes in the reference that Brian was making to Walter Cronkite in a time when you turn on the TV. Of course, I was not born yet, when you only had ABC, CBS, and NBC, and that was it. And I think a real effort journalistically to present things in a fair manner and a thorough manner. Now you have, obviously, the polarization of the media as well, and so that's a huge problem. When I was asked, I got a call from Phil Griffith, the president of MSNBC, and he said, "Wow, I watched your show. You do a tremendous job. You get guests that we can't get or we have trouble getting." And I thanked him, and he said, "But we never put your show on MSNBC." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because our talent," which I wouldn't describe myself that way, our talent has a point of view. And I mean, the bottom line is, in the commercial media, is you're there to sell advertising. You're there to attract a certain demographic. And if you don't attract that demographic and you don't sell advertising, you're not going to be on the air very long. So I think that's one of the real problems. But I think there is a significant number of Americans, and I would yield that it's a minority, that are actually interested in hearing both sides, or sometimes three sides, of issues, and who want to be well informed, and who are interested in that kind of civil, reasoned discussion. But right now, the folks who run the media would argue that that's not the demographic that they're going for.
Let's take one or two more questions. Got one over there, Cliff.
Yeah, I wrote this down because I want to start a little bit broad and focus on targeting you particularly as a tool. The people who capture economic value in our society, they're winning the war against the people who create economic value, either through innovation for the most part, with a few outliers. But the middle class in particular, those working people that make that great contribution to velocity of money and TV and all that stuff, that actually is what makes the middle class great, is money
Now, you know, Brian has to summarize the question.
No, I'm thinking about it. I've got a couple of little paragraphs.
So ask him a question.
Macroeconomic analysis, but
Uh-huh.
also do bottom-up corporate development, little tiny firms starting with ideas. So I'm kind of sandwiching here.
Okay.
So I'm going to go fast. But inside the Beltway, there's a certain amount of derision for constituents and the masses. You and I both know how to do business, so there we can go do it. I don't want to. You don't want to. Want to live out here, make it better here. Okay, so, you know,
I'm willing to visit on occasion.
Yeah.
it is what it is. It's not probably going to change. But what I want to know is we need to hear more from the people who create economic value and put them in better positions to speak and lead our society instead of staffers and people inside the Beltway and politicians, many of whom have never even had a real job. So we have to empower better people. You put Jack Welch on TV, he sounds brilliant, but he's 80 years old, nobody's going to listen to him. 50% of the millennials voting for Bernie, you know, that kind of thing. We can't have
Bernie's not a lot younger than Jack Welch.
like that left-leaning stuff that's already been proven to fail in about 18 countries that I know of. So we need people to understand value creation. The Republican Party can't give it to us anymore. The Democratic Party never did. They go get the money after it's been created. We don't have the business leaders getting put in place. How can you use the civility initiative or some of the other things that you have in the township have to help train those leaders to speak so they're not as long-winded and make their point?
So I'm going to try to do a summary on that one. So the question is,
I'm going to get a cup of coffee.
yeah, I know, I'm going to be quick. How do we get the true value creators to be the flag bearers that will help bring our country together? Pretty close. Come on. Okay, good. I tried.
This guy's good.
That's right.
I'm impressed. I think I just would have repeated the entire question. You know, it actually brings up a really good issue. I think, you know, I've dealt with leaders of major corporations for a long time. I was actually on the board of trustees as a young pup of Princeton University. And on that board was Michael Blumenthal, who was the head of Bendix and became Secretary of the Treasury, Charlie Scribner, who ran the publishing company, Scribner and Sons, Manning Brown, who ran Equitable Life, Dick Huff, who ran AT&T's Long Lines, which was the money maker for AT&T back in the day, Lawrence Rockefeller, the richest at the time of the Rockefeller brothers, and the list went on. And it was fascinating to be with those people. What I found when I got in the media was that the quality of leadership in this country was just as good. If you talk to most CEOs, and we had you saw Tony early there, I've had other folks on the show, but if at the pinnacle of business, if you talk to them, these people are, for the most part, very, very intelligent, extraordinarily well informed, and as articulate, and generally more articulate than most of the people in elected office. They represent tremendous potential as leaders. But guess what? They have handlers, and those handlers, they're essentially payoff matrix. You know, if they're doing game theory is, if I put my boss on a show and he or she screws up, the company's in trouble and I'm in trouble. If I don't put them on the show and don't have them take the kind of leadership position you're talking about, I have no risk, no immediate risk for the company, no immediate risk for my boss, no immediate risk for my career. And so what you have in corporate America, I think, is this incredible cadre of talent that is untapped and that is unleashed. And I'm talking about America's CEOs because so many of them are afraid to be in the public. Now, many are, but the percentage who are out there, and even that percentage, when you reduce it by the number of people in the kind of conversations that we're talking about with people who disagree with them, it asymptotically approaches zero. And so our country has terrified American CEOs to the point that they are not making the public policy contribution that they could make.
Okay, last question. Do we have one?
Can I just ask
Yes.
a question? You know, I always look back and what precipitated politicians being attacked and their families being attacked. I look back to Gary Harber. First time it ever happened. You know, everybody looked at Donna Rice and monkey business, and that killed his campaign. That was the beginning of it, in my opinion. Do you agree with that, number one? And then number two, do you think that's why many business leaders don't want to get involved? And what happened with Ross Perot? You mentioned it.
So the question is, what precipitated the media going after people on a personal level? And you thought it might be Gary Hart and his personal situation that he had. And does that also translate over to the business world not wanting to get involved for that very reason?
Well, I don't think it necessarily started with Gary Hart's situation. I think that what happened was you had a change in the leadership of political strategists, and I think that began probably actually 5 years, 10 years before Hart, where you started to have the scorched earth policies coming out. I mean, you can look at the Nixon administration and CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President. What a great acronym! They obviously had Madison Avenue marketing on their team. So no, I think it was found, and of course the growing role of television played a tremendous part in that. But I think what happened was, and some people will blame the Republican side, and then the Democrats adopted all those strategies as well. But what happened was it was very effective. When people say, I hate negative advertising, well, they may, but negative advertising is extraordinarily effective. So I think what happened starting 40 years ago or so, 30, 40 years ago, is you had the beginning of that trend. In Gary's case, it obviously was a mistake for him to say to the press, nothing I'm doing is exciting, follow me around if you want. Wrong statement. And what's really sad is if you know Gary Hart, the guy is brilliant. He would have made an extraordinary president if you know how smart this guy is. But obviously, we all can be smart, and that doesn't stop us from doing dumb things. So I think it's more the political strategists who started this trend, and now it's just, everybody does it. You look at some of the history of someone like Karl Rove and his predecessors, and the bottom line is a lot of people go into campaigns on both sides of the aisle, and their attitude is, we will do anything it takes to win, and anything goes. There are absolutely no limitations, because as one Democratic operative told me once, who had at his control millions of dollars of funds to allocate, he said, when I talked about some of the tactics that they used, which I thought were really shameful, he said, if you don't win, you don't govern. And it's the attitude today is the ends justify the means. Period. Just period.
Let's give Aaron a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much.